You're walking across a plain in East Africa. It's dawn. The grass is still wet, the air smells like dust and rain that hasn't fallen yet, and your feet, your bare feet, are pressing into the cold earth with every step. There's no boot, there's no sock, there's no cushioned insole engineered by a team of designers in Portland. There's just skin, skin against gravel, skin against thorns, skin against the same ground that has been trying to injure feet for 4 million years. And here's the strange part. It doesn't hurt because your feet, in this moment, are not the soft pink things you're wiggling right now inside whatever you're wearing. They are armor. They are tools. They are the result of an unbroken chain of ancestors who walked, ran, hunted, migrated across continents, crossed deserts and ice, and did essentially all of it without a single thing between them and the planet. So here's the question nobody actually stops to ask. For roughly 99% of human existence, we wore nothing on our feet. Not sandals, not moccasins, not even a scrap of bark tied with a vine. Nothing. And the obvious assumption is that this was because they were primitive, that they simply hadn't figured shoes out yet, that the shoe was waiting to be invented like the wheel or the alphabet, and our poor barefoot ancestors were just suffering in the meantime, waiting for someone clever to come along. But that's not what happened, not even close, because here's the thing nobody tells you. Ancient humans didn't wear shoes not because they couldn't make them. They didn't wear shoes because, for most of our history, they didn't need them. Their bodies were the shoe. And the story of when that finally changed, when a human being first decided to wrap something around their foot and walk out the door, turns out to be one of the most surprisingly recent chapters in the entire human story. So recent, in fact, that shoes are younger than agriculture, younger than dogs, younger than art painted on cave walls. Let that sink in for a second. We were making sculptures before we were making sandals. Let's start with the foot itself, because before you can understand why humans went without shoes, you have to understand what the human foot actually is. And the human foot is genuinely one of the most bizarre, over-engineered pieces of biology in your entire body. 26 bones, 33 joints, more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, all packed into a structure smaller than a paperback book. A quarter of all the bones in your body are located below your ankles. Think about that. You are, structurally speaking, mostly foot, and the star of the show is the arch. That gentle curve on the inside of your foot that most people never think about. It's not decorative, it's a spring. When you step down, the arch flattens slightly and stores energy, and when you push off, it snaps back and returns that energy to your stride. Researchers have estimated that this spring recycles a significant fraction of the energy of every step, making walking and running dramatically more efficient than it has any right to be. No other primate has a foot like this. A chimpanzee's foot is basically a hand, grippy, flexible, great for trees, useless for a marathon. The human foot is a machine built for one thing above all else. Distance, endless, grinding, relentless distance. And it was built to do it barefoot. Now here's where it gets interesting. If the foot is a machine, it needs something to protect its most important surface, the sole. And evolution handled that too, with something you're standing on right now and completely taking for granted. Callus. Most of us think of calluses as a flaw, a rough patch, something you scrub off, file down, pay a professional to remove. But in 2018, a team of researchers led by Nicholas Haloka and Daniel Lieberman at Harvard University published a study in the journal Nature that flipped that assumption on its head. They looked at the feet of people who habitually walk barefoot, communities in Kenya and elsewhere, and compared them to people who wear shoes constantly. And what they found was remarkable. The barefoot walkers had thick, hardened calluses, obviously. But here's the twist. Those calluses did not dull their sense of touch. The researchers measured it directly. The nerves underneath could still feel the ground, still detect texture and pressure and vibration just fine. A callus, it turns out, is a near-perfect natural shoe sole. It protects you from sharp objects and hot ground and rough terrain, and it does it without cutting you off from the sensory feedback your brain needs to balance and move. A modern shoe, by contrast, gives you the protection but throws away the feedback entirely. Your foot goes numb to the world. So our ancestors weren't walking around with tender, bleeding feet, wincing at every pebble. They had a lifetime of built-up armor down there, growing thicker and tougher year by year. Their feet were, in a very real sense, wearing shoes the entire time. Shoes made of themselves. And this is the part that really breaks the modern brain. Barefoot wasn't the compromise. Barefoot was the optimized state. Let's talk about running, because this is where the human foot stops being impressive and starts being, frankly, ridiculous. Humans are, for our size, some of the best long-distance runners in the entire animal kingdom. Not the fastest. A squirrel would humiliate you in a sprint. But over distance, over hours, in heat, across open ground, there is almost nothing that can beat us. We can run animals to death. Literally, it's a documented hunting strategy called persistence hunting, where a human simply keeps a faster animal moving in the midday sun until the animal collapses from heat exhaustion, unable to sweat the way we can. We are the endurance monsters of the mammal world. And in 2010, Daniel Lieberman, the same Harvard researcher, published another landmark study, this time in Nature, looking at how people run barefoot versus in modern shoes. And what he found was that barefoot runners land completely differently. When you strap on a big cushioned running shoe with a padded heel, you tend to slam down heel first, sending a sharp spike of force straight up your leg with every stride. But barefoot runners, they land on the middle or front of the foot, softer. The arch in the calf absorb the impact like the spring they were designed to be. No jarring collision. The body, left to its own devices, protects itself. In other words, the way our ancestors ran, barefoot, for millions of years, may have been gentler on their bodies than the way we run now, wrapped in technology specifically designed to protect us. History is sometimes absurd in exactly this way. We invented a solution to a problem our own feet had already solved, so now we have a real mystery on our hands. If barefoot feet were this good, armored, springy, sensitive, built for endless distance, then why on earth did anyone ever put on a shoe at all? What changed? And to answer that, we need to figure out when it happened, which is where things get genuinely tricky, because shoes, unlike bones or stone tools, do not survive. Leather rots, plant fiber decays, grass and bark and hide dissolve back into the earth within a few years under normal conditions. The archaeological record of footwear is essentially a record of things that almost never last. So for the vast majority of human history, we have zero physical shoes. Not because nobody wore them, but because the evidence itself has vanished. And this is where you have to remember one of the golden rules of archaeology. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we haven't found a 100,000-year-old shoe doesn't automatically mean nobody made one. So the scientists had to get clever. If the shoes themselves are gone, then maybe, just maybe, the human body kept a record of them. And here is where a researcher named Eric Trinkos enters the story. Trinkos, a paleoanthropologist at Washington University in St. Louis, is one of the most respected experts on Neanderthal and early human skeletons in the world. And in 2005, he published a paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science with a deceptively simple idea. He asked a question almost no one had thought to ask. What does wearing shoes do to your bones? Think about it. When you walk barefoot, your toes do a lot of work. They grip, they flex, they push off against the ground, and all that force builds up the bones of your toes, making them thick and robust, the same way a weightlifter's bones get denser. But when you wear a supportive shoe, the shoe takes over some of that job. Your toes relax. They don't have to grip and drive the way they used to. And over a lifetime, and over many generations, that means the toe bones, specifically the smaller ones, the lesser toes, get thinner, more delicate, more gracile, to use the technical word. So Trinkos went looking. He examined the foot bones of ancient humans across a huge span of time, comparing the thickness of the leg bones, which stayed strong from all the walking, to the thickness of the little toe bones. And he found a pattern. In the oldest specimens, the toe bones were thick and strong, exactly what you'd expect from a life lived barefoot. But then, at a certain point in the record, something shifts. The leg bones stay powerful. These people were still walking enormous distances. But the little toe bones start to get suspiciously slender. Something was protecting those toes. Something was doing the gripping for them. And the date he arrived at, somewhere around 40,000 years ago. That's Trinkos's estimate for roughly when supportive footwear may have become common enough to leave a fingerprint in human anatomy. Not a shoe you can hold, a shoe you can read, written into the skeleton itself, 40,000 years ago. Let that number sit there for a moment. To put it in perspective, Anatomically modern humans had already existed for well over 100,000 years by that point. We had spread across Africa, into the Middle East, into Europe and Asia. We were painting, carving, burying our dead with ornaments. And for most of that time, according to the bones, the feet were bare. Now, Trincos was careful. He didn't claim to have found the first shoe. He was reading an indirect signal, and indirect signals can be argued with. Other researchers have pushed back, pointed out that toe robustness can vary for lots of reasons. This is science working the way it's supposed to. A claim, a challenge, a refinement. But the core insight is hard to shake. Something changed in how our feet were being treated, and it changed relatively late in the game, and it left a mark you can measure with calipers. But here's the frustrating thing about the bone evidence. It tells you roughly when, but it can't show you the object. For an actual, physical, hold-it-in-your-hands ancient shoe, you have to jump forward in time, all the way to the era of environments strange enough to preserve the unpreservable, places bone dry or frozen or sealed away from the air, because that's the only way footwear survives. And when you go looking for the oldest surviving shoes on Earth, you find them in exactly those kinds of places. Take the American West. In 1938, an archaeologist named Luther Cressman, working in a place called Fort Rock Cave in Oregon, uncovered dozens of sandals woven from sagebrush bark, beautifully made, twisted, plaited, clearly the product of skilled hands. And when they were later radiocarbon dated, the results came back astonishing. Roughly 9,000 to 10,000 years old. The dry desert cave, sealed under a layer of volcanic ash from an ancient eruption, had preserved plant fiber that anywhere else would have crumbled to nothing within a generation. 10,000 years old, and already these aren't crude first attempts. These are refined, practiced designs, which tells you the tradition behind them was almost certainly much
older. We're just seeing the oldest examples lucky enough to survive. And then there's the oldest surviving leather shoe in the world. For that, we go to a cave called Arini 1 in the mountains of Armenia. In 2008, a team led by the archaeologist Ron Pinhasi was excavating the cave when they found something extraordinary sitting in a shallow pit, stuffed with grass. A single shoe, a right foot, roughly a modern size 7, made from one piece of cowhide, cut to the shape of the wearer's foot, laced up with a leather cord. And it was in staggering condition, so well preserved that it looked, in the photographs, like it could have been lost last winter rather than in the Stone Age. When they dated it, published in the journal PLOS 1 in 2010, they got a number around 5,500 years old, roughly 3,500 BC, older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid, a shoe, complete with the grass someone had packed inside it, possibly for insulation, possibly to keep its shape, sitting in a cave for 5,500 years, waiting. And you cannot look at the Arini 1 shoe without thinking about the person who wore it. Their foot, their laces, tied by their own fingers, a cold morning, an ordinary decision to put their shoes on. And then, through 55 centuries of collapse and preservation and pure chance, that ordinary object survives when almost everything else about their entire world is gone. History is beautiful in the most absurd ways. And then, of course, there is the most famous ancient footwear of all, Titsi, the Iceman, the astonishingly preserved body of a man who died in the Alps around 3,200 BC and was frozen into a glacier for over 5,000 years before hikers found him in 1991. And Titsi was wearing shoes, real sophisticated cold weather shoes, bear skin for the soles, deer hide for the upper, a netting of bark string to hold it all together, and soft grass packed inside for warmth, like a Stone Age sock. These were not desperate scraps tied to a foot. These were engineered mountain boots, made by someone who understood exactly what they were doing, for a landscape that would kill a barefoot traveler in hours. And that, right there, is the clue to the whole mystery. Look at where these shoes come from. A frozen alpine glacier, a high mountain cave in Armenia, deep, sheltered caves in the Oregon desert, cold, rock, extremes. These are not the warm African plains where the human foot was forged. These are the edges of the world, the places humans migrated into much later, places our barefoot bodies were never designed for. Because that's the answer, or at least a huge part of it. For most of our history, we lived in the environment our feet evolved for. Warm ground, forgiving terrain, skin and callus and arch, all working exactly as intended. We didn't need shoes for the same reason a fish doesn't need a raincoat. But then we left. We walked out of the tropics and into places our ancestors were never built for. Snow that would give a barefoot frostbite in minutes. Jagged glacial rock, frozen mud, deserts that scorch the soul by noon and freeze it by night. And suddenly, for the first time, the beautiful barefoot machine met terrain it couldn't handle on its own. The shoe wasn't an upgrade to a broken body. It was a passport, a piece of technology that let a tropical animal survive in places it had absolutely no business surviving. We didn't invent the shoe because our feet failed us. We invented the shoe because we were ambitious enough to go somewhere our feet had never been. And that reframes everything. The shoe isn't the beginning of foot technology. It's the beginning of human trespass. The moment we decided the whole planet was ours, including the parts actively trying to kill us. But there's a piece of this story we haven't touched yet, because so far, everything we've looked at is a physical object, or a bone, a sandal, a leather shoe, a slender toe. And all of those top out at a few tens of thousands of years, at the very most. But footprints, actual impressions of ancient feet, pressed into mud and volcanic ash, and then impossibly turned to stone, those go back much, much further, millions of years further. And when you start reading the oldest footprints on Earth, looking for the faintest trace of anything wrapped around a foot, you run into a set of tracks so ancient, so unexpected, and so haunting that they might just rewrite the entire question of when the human journey on two bare feet actually began. And that trail, the oldest footprints our ancestors ever left, leads somewhere almost nobody expects.
Summand dit moisiv, like and subscribe.